parents' divorce, my dad decided that he would invite their whole family over to catch up. I was begging my dad not to do this, but he said that it would be nice. So when they came over, my dad said to show that girl my bedroom since I had gotten a new TV. I show her to my room and she is acting all normal and she's complimenting my room. But I was still creeped out because she just sat on the floor while I tried to put a movie in my DVD player. And I shit you not, out of nowhere, mid-conversation, in the most deadpan voice, she says, quote, "Matt is here," unquote. At that exact moment, saw something running next to the car. He was about the height of the truck, maybe a little bit taller, and he was running full speed. He had long dark hair and piercing eyes, and a nose like a muzzle, but it went to a point, almost like a coyote. He had a beaded shirt with beads that made a shallow V across his chest. His arms were scrawny and his face was sunken and hairy. As he ran, he turned to me and he bared his teeth. I immediately lost all the breath from my lungs and I was frozen. I gripped the wheel to control the vehicle and I turned away from him and looked back. He was losing lateral distance from the vehicle, but he was still keeping pace. I turned back to the road and I hit the gas. I looked over again and he was gone. I look in the rearview mirror and I see nothing. There's nothing in the road. There is nothing ahead. I sat frozen, holding the wheel and speeding down the road. I hadn't made a noise. My wife had not woken up. I didn't say anything, and I did not stop the rest of the way either. When I got to Flagstaff, I woke up my wife and we went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Even as I write this, I have a terrible feeling of dread. I have spent tons of time in the desert, in the forest, camping, hiking. I feel fine if I'm in a cemetery at night. I have seen flying objects and assumed a logical reason for them. But I have no explanation for what happened that night. I saw that. It happened. Maybe I fell asleep. Maybe it was a dream, but I do not personally believe that. The thing that I saw was there. Years later, I recounted this story to someone who lived in the area who was native. They told me that what I saw was a skinwalker, and it made sense. Right now, I'm afraid. A grown man can be drawn close to tears from this. I do not believe in gods. I do not believe in angels or ghosts, but I do believe in skinwalkers. I try to be so quiet when I take a sip of tea. I'm sorry if it's loud. I'm sure overthinking it makes it worse. I gotta just not care. Just enjoy my darn tea. That is creepy. I was gonna say, like, what are the chances of that being a moose? But wait, he said near Las Vegas, right? possibly be wrong. So my granddad and his family grew up in rural southern Ireland. So there's fields, moors, and rivers galore. And the family all lived pretty near each other. There was an old tale that existed in the area that went something along the lines of, quote, "If you hear music coming from seemingly nowhere, leave. Somebody is in danger," unquote. So my granddad and his brother Nicky were out on the moors when all of a sudden they both hear music. And they have no idea where it's coming from. Naturally, following the tale, they leave and returned home. When they got back, though, they found that their cousin, at least I think it was their cousin, was missing. Several days had passed, and there had been no trace of her. It was like she vanished. But one night, in a storm, she was suddenly at the door. She was soaking wet, but seemingly unharmed. And when people asked her where she was, her only reply ever was, quote, "I was listening to the music," unquote. This is all she would respond with when asked about the whole situation, even up until the day she died. My granddad unfortunately passed away in December of 2013 to cancer, but his brother Nicky is still around. He's still living in Ireland, and he still swears it to be true. You hear all the time about, quote, "my cousin's aunt's brother who is twice removed," unquote, having something happen to them. But something about having it happen to somebody very close to you, and then other people actually backing it up, seems to really hit home. Yeah. I mean, I'm over here, all the way across the world, in Canada, and even I know that Ireland isn't only Ireland. I don't know. But I've heard of the crazy, fairy stories, and they're not good stories. I grew up in the west of Ireland, and within sight of my bedroom window was this really old hill and a castle ruin. I remember being told as a kid that there was a fairy fort on top of that hill, and this was not the pretty, cute little Tinkerbell type fairies, but the dark kind, the ones that are typical of Irish folklore, and that sometimes people heard music from. But of course you had to stay away and ignore it, because if you were to go looking for the source of that music, you would supposedly end up being kidnapped by them and then forced to attend whatever party they were having. Which at first 16 years of age into my mother's room, roaring me arse off about ghosts, and she woke up and clearly told me to shut up. You'll wake your sisters. I calmed down and I slept on the floor in my mother's room that night. Now that house had been built by my parents. No one had died in it. Finally, at a loss, we just stood on either side of the bed, facing each other, and we listened in disbelief. And then it finally stopped abruptly. I have no explanation for that. My parents have owned the house for almost 10 years since then, and a variety of odd things have happened, though no one else has ever heard the labored breathing, which I rather think is just what it would sound like if, say, I just got full body chills. It sounds like a person dying of tuberculosis. I didn't see that coming. I don't know how, but I didn't. Here is another more recent story from that house. My dad works in DC and he comes home to Maine on the weekends. This means that my mom is home alone, or with just my little brother, or she's there with just my little brother on many nights. She's kept a journal through the 12 years that they lived there of the paranormal goings on. She is far braver than I am, and I could not live in that house. My parents' bed is now located in the room where the previous story occurred. It's the downstairs front left room of the earliest part of the house. It would have originally been a formal sitting room in the 18th century when the house was built. It has a pair of double doors leading to the keeping room, which runs across the entire back half of the house. As with all old houses, the floors are uneven and rise and fall based on the sills and the support beams below. As a result, the double doors shut firmly when they are closed, and they take a significant amount of force to open. I personally have opened and closed these doors many times, and they are a real bastard to open. Got it. Noted. So, this past autumn, my mom is sleeping alone in the room with the family's border collie, who sleeps on the bed. They are both sound asleep around 2 a.m. when both of these double doors swing open. first part of the L connected to the keeping room at the back of the earliest part of the home. The L dates to the 1820s. There have been multiple instances when people in my family have been sitting in the room watching TV, and then suddenly they smell a very strong floral perfume. It will come on, hang around for a few minutes, and then disappear. Another time, my mother was sitting on the couch with my sister. My younger sister was in the computer room, which is off the northwest part of the keeping room. She and my mom both heard our other sister get up from her chair and walk into the room to stand beside them and watch TV over their shoulders. After a moment, my mom said something about the show to my one sister, but she responded that she couldn't really hear my mom as she was still in the computer room. She had never left the computer room. Both my mom and my sister had distinctly heard something walk up behind them. Another time, about a year ago, my mom was sitting on the couch and she was about to start knitting. She had taken a massive ball of yarn out of her knitting bag and set it on the side table. She was fishing around in her knitting bag for the right size needles when she heard a loud knock on the side table. She turned to look and she saw her pile of yarn had risen off the side table about 2 inches. It fell back down. She heard another loud knock, and the yarn rose back up, then fell back down. It happened a third time, and she actually snatched it out of the air. Last time I was at the house, I spent about an hour trying to figure out a possible explanation for that one, and I'm still stumped. Another time, my dad got up out of bed to stoke the wood stove. He was standing in the dining room where the stove is located when he heard a woman's voice say sharply, quote, "Be careful," unquote. miles away from home, her car broke down. At least she broke down in front of a family friend's house, and they said that she could use their phone. She called Dad, and he came down and he picked her up. The friend said that she could just leave her car in the driveway until the next day. She decided to just stay at her parents' for the night and then head out in the morning. As they are coming back home, it's now a little after 10 p.m. and while driving through a particularly wooded spot, they hear a loud, inhuman scream. It was so loud that it drowned out the radio. It drowned out the engine of the car. It even drowned out their voices for the split second that it happened. Dad slammed on the brakes and they started freaking out, asking what was that noise. When suddenly something appeared at the edge of the car's lights on the side of the road. It looked like a coyote, but it was at least 7 feet tall, and it was walking on its hind legs, and it had a black and white striped tail. It walked across the road in front of the car, and then once it disappeared across the road, they heard that scream again. Only it was far louder than the first time, and they decided to get the hell out of there. Creepy. So this was when my best friend's grandfather passed. His parents both died when he was young, so his grandfather meant everything to him. He raised him. He got him his car, got him his job, and he put the down payment on his house. And when he passed, he was just a wreck. He fell into depression, the whole works. He had a dream that he heard some noises in his kitchen, so he grabbed his shotgun and he went in there. In the dream, his grandfather was sitting on a lounge chair and smoking a pipe, looking at him. His grandpa laughs and he tells him to put the gun down. My friend says, quote, "What? I thought you were dead," unquote. His grandpa laughs again and he tells him to come and sit down. He tells his grandpa how scared he is, how unsure he is about life now, that his only father is gone and that he doesn't know what to do. His grandpa tells him everything is going to be okay and to be the man that he raised him to be. They talk for a few minutes about life and they share some stories, and his grandpa got up to leave. And my friend tells him, "No, you can't leave. I'll make us some breakfast in the morning and we'll go around to some of the pawn shops." He was chair that his grandpa had been sitting on in the dream. My friend doesn't smoke, and he has sat in that chair multiple times since his grandpa had passed. I don't know. I like that one, but I don't know. I really hope it's true. Can you hear that? It scared me. So my brother was diagnosed with cancer when he was 3. A few days after his diagnosis, I was sitting out in the living room with my parents, and he walked out of his room. He said that a man named Tony was floating in the corner of his room, eating peppers, and telling him that he was okay, and that he was just watching over him. Tony was my dad's grandfather, who died before we were born. And he loved eating peppers. It was really, really weird, as my dad never talked about him, especially nothing detailed like eating peppers. My parents freaked out a bit. My brother was on treatment for 2.5 years, and he is doing great now. Started college, and he wants to become a pediatric oncologist. A long time ago, about 7 years, I was in my bed at my barracks, and I had an unexpected visitor. It was about 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. I was awoken by a voice, indistinct, as in I could not make out a coherent word. It was just garbled. My stomach, sorry. I looked up, and the sleepy and confused me decided that somebody was visiting my roommate and decided to bug me. For some reason, it's always funny to bother the sleeping guy. I grabbed my blanket and I wrapped it around my waist upon realizing that I was in my underwear. And that was when the light hit the figure speaking to me. It was a woman. I couldn't make out a face, but she was a medium build and long hair. And again, she spoke. I could not register what she was saying, but I was falling asleep as she spoke. So it was merely the sound of her voice that was waking me back up. I was often fatigued after work. I glanced once again at the woman, and I could not bring myself to attempt to talk to someone who was clearly just trying to annoy me. I apologized, and I told her that I was just too tired and to talk to me in the morning. I laid back down, and I nearly instantly was taken back by slumber. She really enjoys going to old houses alone and exploring. So she wasn't jumpy or expecting anything bad. She does this stuff all the time. She's taking pictures of the rooms and everything is going great until she gets to this one room which is halfway down the hall. Her camera flashes, but no picture is showing up. She tries several more times, illuminating the room with flash, but she still is getting no image. She assumes that her camera is broken, but continues down the hallway to explore the house. She gets to a bathroom at the back of the house and sees that the water in the toilet is frozen, and she laughs because it wasn't winterized. Not thinking, she pulls out her camera and takes a picture of it, and it works. She's pretty pumped because now that means that she can go back to the room and finally get that other picture. When she goes back to take a picture of the room, the same thing happens. There's a flash, but no picture. And then things get weird. She hears a mutter/whisper sound from right behind her. Like someone was right over her shoulder. It was unintelligible rambling, but she said that it sounded urgent and agitated. She spun around and there was no one there. And that was when she felt the icy pit in her stomach and realized that she needed to get out of there. She ran outside and she searched the perimeter of the house. She thought maybe someone was outside talking and the acoustics made them sound closer than they were. But no one was there. The house was surrounded by at least a square mile of open field. Nobody was around. So she decided to leave without her pictures. Okay. So I am not sure if I believe in the paranormal. I always try to find some sort of a reasonable explanation before freaking myself out. But my new house has had some events happen that are very hard to explain. Myself and my 5 other family members moved into a nearly brand new home this past summer in July. The house is only 3 years old and the previous family lived in it for 2 years. Now I'm not sure if this has anything to do with the incidents, but we actually live across the street from a fairly large cemetery. The cemetery is quite new and doesn't really give off any creepy vibes though. The first incident happened about 2 weeks after we all moved in. I was sitting in the living room on the couch reading The Mist while enjoying our new fireplace. My sister was in the basement and my parents had gone out grocery shopping. I hear what sounds like a car pulling into our driveway and then the garage doors opening. My dog, who always comes to the door to greet my parents when they get home, comes running out of the bedroom and he looks out the front window like she usually does when they get home. I expect them to come in the back any second, but I hear nothing. was in the kitchen doing dishes. She calls to me from the kitchen and asks if I've just heard anything. I tell her no, I was just sitting in my room quietly. She then tells me that while she was doing the dishes, she heard a loud male voice, basically right in her ear, yell, quote, "What are you doing?" unquote. And it was so loud that she assumed I had to have heard it too. Our house does have very high ceilings and everything echoes, so you can hear noises from across the house. I didn't hear a thing. I live in a small bedroom on the upper floor of the house. All of the bedrooms have carpet that make a very distinct sound when you walk on them. I usually sleep with earplugs in because we have a toddler living in the house and I enjoy my sleep. But occasionally, when she is away for the evening at my sister's boyfriend's house, I'll only sleep with one earplug in and lay my other ear on my pillow so I have the freedom to hear when I like. Starting in the early winter, sometime before Christmas, I am woken up around 4:30 in the morning to what sounds like somebody walking across my carpet at a regular pace. I wake up very easily to sounds, so I'm not overly concerned. I immediately just assume that it's my cat, and I sit up in bed to see what he's doing. I turn on my cell phone and I shine it around my room like a flashlight, and I don't see anything. Now I'm a little scared at this point, because I sat up so quickly that there was no way my cat could have walked in and out of the room that fast. A few minutes later, I hear my cat walking down the hallway and he comes into my room, which means he was on the other side of the house. I'm a reasonable person, so I try to justify these noises to something to do with my earplug rubbing up on my pillow and making a sound similar to the sound of my carpet. However, the noises have continued on over the months, happening every few weeks or so for a couple of nights in a row. Whether I have both earplugs in or no earplugs in. At this point, I've only mentioned this happening to my mom because she believes in paranormal stuff. Now at this point, I am starting to think that I am going insane or beginning to develop schizophrenia or something, and I am genuinely concerned about the noises that I am hearing at night. But finally, my mom tells me that my sister, who lives in the basement bedroom with her boyfriend, has been hearing the same noises at night. Except, rather than hearing someone walking across their room, they have described it as somebody crawling across their floor. But don't they have a toddler? When I heard this, I didn't sleep for a couple of nights. The obviously was, wait, you're